contract is it will not take away those inalienable rights between that people have as humans. He understood that. But he also understood that he had to create a document, and this was the biggest trick of all. Think about this for a moment. We had 13 functioning state governments at the time. They were the dominant governments under the articles that Alan mentioned. He had to figure out a way to create a national government superimposed over those state governments without threatening the powers of the states. Try that for a dance. And yet, he was able to do that through the construct of federalism. And we will never know whether it was because he thought it was a wonderful design or because he was just rationalizing after the fact. But he talks about the glories of a large republic in Federalist Paper number 10. One where nuts can take over in one state, nuts of a different kind may take over another state, but with a large republic, we can prevent the spark that leads to a fire in one part of the country from becoming a general conflagration, which is the language that he talks about in the article in Federalist Paper number 10. So the glories of the large republic that splits powers between nations and states. And the reason that nations and states fight with one another, I have a chapter in one of my textbooks that says, when they say the issue is federalism, they're lying to you. No one cares about federalism. I always pick out examples from the presidents to do this. I'll pick out Trump today. Last year was Obama, okay? But Donald Trump wants to devolve power to the states. He wants to create more block grants. He wants to give the states more discretion in the way they spend money that comes from the federal government because they're closer to the people and can be more efficient. But if cities decide they want to be sanctuary cities, he wants to take that right away from them, right? And I'm not saying that to argue with President Trump, simply to tell you that he is schizophrenic on the issue of federalism like every one of us is. Because we don't care about federalism, we care about policy, and we always have. But Madison argues that that's exactly the constitutional design. Federalism structures disagreement, and it allows us to resolve problems in maybe an ugly and inefficient way, but in a way that keeps that spark and fire from going into a general conflagration. The second structure that Madison understands is that we have to structure decision-making where people who profoundly disagree with one another on basic things have to talk to one another anyway. People who profoundly disagree on basic things have to talk to one another. Look, he said, people have ambitions, and the biggest problem in every society is the maldistribution of property. Those who have property are going to disagree with those who do not, and they're going to disagree profoundly, and they're going to disagree on a continuing basis, and we have to structure decision-making to do that. My favorite Federalist Papers, and I hope every one of you will go home and read this one tonight. It's short. It's 3 pages long. You can do that before you watch the Vietnam series on PBS. It has my 2 favorite lines from James Madison in it. The first is this: if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But men are not angels. And so we have to structure decision making so that people who disagree with one another have to talk. Because, the second great statement, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Not because one side is good and the other side is bad, but because one set of good values inherently comes into conflict with another set of good values. The problem in the world is not compromising between good people and bad people. It's compromising between good people who have different priorities in their values. And that's the genius of the Constitution. That's the genius of the Constitution. And that's the reason that Trump supporters are so frustrated this year that he can't get anything done, and why those who don't like Trump are so gratified that he can't get anything done. The Constitution is structured to create that. We now, in just the last month, have started seeing Democrats talk to Republicans. What a revolutionary idea. Exactly what James Madison was talking about. I could go on because I love this Constitution. But if I were to tell you what you should leave here with, it's that you should take seriously the preamble to the Constitution, which is still one of the greatest statements about governance ever made by humankind. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves, for Jenna's beautiful children. Do establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's the legacy. That's the legacy. And that's why September 17th is such an important day, and why both Alan and I are so happy that Victoria invited us to come speak today.
Yeah.
What do you think the writers of the Constitution would think about Marbury versus Madison and the Supreme Court essentially becoming the all-powerful branch?
Well, the Federalists loved it, the Anti-Federalists hated it. I mean, look, let's be honest. Marbury versus Madison was a political decision. It was a decision by people that wanted to grow the power of the national government. And it, of course, is enshrined in the Supreme Court of the United States. It is inherently the province of the Judicial Department to determine what the law is. And that's what underscores the power of the courts and sets up the conflict that Alan was talking about a few minutes ago.
They made it up. Yeah, they made it up. Just like they made up a lot of things.
And you know, one of the things that I love about, I love making the story, telling the story, because of course, Thomas Jefferson and John Marshall, who were the two biggest protagonists in that, were second cousins.
Oh, were they?
They were second cousins. They were both from Virginia, and they were related to each other, and they both acknowledged that relationship. But they had very different views on what that social contract was.
I find it also very interesting. At the convention, it was done in secret. The only person allowed to take notes was James Madison.
Wasn't that a violation of the Open Meetings Act?
Yeah, so eventually. That's a good point.
And they closed, Alan was talking about opening the windows, but they made the decision to keep the windows closed so the press couldn't listen to what they were saying. This is another one of my favorite ones while we're on the topic, of course. They weren't given permission to write a new Constitution. They were given, the Continental Congress gave them permission to, quote, consider changes to the articles. The first act of the Constitutional Convention, the decision to write a new Constitution, was unconstitutional. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that.
Therefore, when
It couldn't have been unconstitutional
the
because
people,
there wasn't
they
one.
meant us, white, rich people.
That's right.
Are doing this. And that doesn't bother me. That's what goes on.
But they thought more broadly than that too, Alan.
I was going to ask a couple things. What were the basic arguments against the Constitution after it was written? I know that Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson wanted a Bill of Rights.
Right.
And I don't understand why the Bill of Rights was not included in the original.
The answer
Maybe
is,
you can enlighten me.
yeah, okay. They ran out of summer. They ran out of summer. Why do we have the Federal Judiciary Act of 1789? Why do we have the Bill of Rights? The answer is they ran out of summer. It was September and they had to get home and and take the crops in. It was
That was
reaping
it?
time. Absolutely, that was it.
But the Bill of
now,
Rights was really
the Bill of
already
Rights.
written.
Now, why did they choose to do that? It's very simple. They thought that the state Bill of Rights, the national Constitution, was not going to be important. It was the states that had to, because the states were to regulate the health, safety, and welfare of citizens. That was there was no intention in the original Constitution for the national government to be regulating the health, safety, and welfare of citizens. And it was only Thomas Jefferson sitting across the Atlantic and some of the others in the United States who said, wait a minute, if we're going to give the government power, we've got to figure out a way to limit government. And that's what set the role to do that. And of course, the Bill of Rights is patterned on the Virginia Bill of Rights.
Which was written by whom?
George Mason.
Right.
George Mason. So, who my wife is related to. I just have to tell you that.
Is this a disclaimer? No, but I mean, Patrick Henry was so
Well, Patrick
vocal.
Henry was opposed to the whole damn thing. He
Yeah,
said
but
he
he
smelt
wanted
a
to
rat. Patrick Henry didn't want any new Constitution. Patrick Henry wanted to keep the Articles of Confederation in place as they were. He wanted no part of this.
My
And so he's-
understanding was that he wanted the Bill of Rights, which is what,
Right.
he's my favorite founding father, so
Yeah.
I'm defending him.
Give me liberty and give me death, right?
I teach that every year.
Right. Now, the other thing that I think is really important is there were a couple of other issues that the Founding Fathers were very scared of.
Okay.
One is they were scared of perpetual re-election of the president. Thomas Jefferson, that was his biggest objection. He said any idiot, if you give him executive authority, can get re-elected over and over and over again and can structure contests in such a way that he can never lose. And of course, Franklin Roosevelt, I think, essentially proved that correct.
Yeah.
George Washington was the one who started the two-term tradition, and it was as a rebuttal to Jefferson's criticism. The second major Jeffersonian criticism and anti-federalist criticism was the danger of the vice presidency. That was both in the executive branch and in the legislative branch. He was both the vice president to the president. He was also president of the United States Senate. And that was a major concern. John Adams met that criticism by choosing only to be the symbolic leader of the Senate. So the presidencies of George Washington and vice presidency of Adams really diffused many of the criticisms that the people who were opponents of the new Constitution leveled.
What about the military? Wasn't there a debate on the strength of the military?
Well,
as
look, there were
well?
debates on every single thing
Well,
in the
that's true.
Constitution.
That's true.
So yes.
By the way, the French Revolution was going on. I find that fascinating.
That's true.
The French Revolution was going on at about the same time, and
And-
they knew it. They knew these people. The French Revolution really was a revolution that dealt with monarchies more than us. They took the head of Rousseau and they took it into a French cathedral and put it on the mantle to show reason triumphs over religion. The French Revolution. They changed everything.
Yeah.
I know all of you are aghast at that. Well, go yell at the French revolutionaries, you know. But and then of course it got crazy after that. But I find that fascinating. The French Revolution was going on at about the very same time.
The French Revolution starts the year after the Constitution,
Right.
and that's key. In 1786, there was not a critical mass in favor of doing the new Constitution. In 1790, the French Revolution starts. If our Constitution doesn't hit the middle of those two things, we don't have a new Constitution. So it's a really interesting historical accident.
Well, three quick things, and that is, somebody had led a said up to the War of 1812, about the question of monarchies and
Right.
individual rights. But for one, I'm glad that I'm no longer 3/5. I'm glad I'm
We're glad.
But I'm glad, I want to quote, and I don't want to be, I know others want to ask questions. I want to read you two quotes that are not constitutional in nature, but I think they're related. One is, when you go home, tell them for us, and say for you tomorrow, we gave our today. That's from Bradley, from the book, Flags of Our Father. And the other is, a nation that makes a great distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its laws made by cowards, and its wars fought by fools. And that was by Thucydides. And I can, as a veteran in Afghanistan, tell you. I had to read that over and over again.
But
Yeah.
even the 3/5 part of the Constitution, a lot of people has been interpreted in different ways. Some people argue that 3/5 was put in there not the way most of us are trying to interpret it. It was done because they did not want slaves counted as much at that time, but not for the reason why a lot of us like to interpret it, but for the other reason, to take away the power from the southern states. Not to give them more power, it's hard for you to believe that, but to take it away from the southern
Well, it
states. It's hard to believe that. but that
It was a crass decision. But the key point to understanding the 3/5 compromise is not the 3/5 part, it's the fact that they didn't even end the slave trade for 24 years. And that gives the whole thing away. It was nothing more than a compromise to demean African Americans. Now, I agree with your assessment. I wasn't in Afghanistan and Iraq, but my son was. So I've been up nights worried whether my son was going to make it home or not. And I hear, and what you said resonates with me completely.
It was actually the northern states that put the 3/5 in. The southern states wanted 100%.
Well, sure.
Because
Well,
they were so underpopulated.
Well, here's the key. The
And
key
they
on the
wouldn't have the
3/5
representation in Congress.
The key with the 3/5 compromise is there are two halves to it. Most people don't recognize this. They see the one half of it, which is representation in the House of Representatives. What they don't realize is that until the 16th Amendment, we couldn't have an income tax. Every tax in the United States was a head tax. And so, yes, the Southerners got 3/5 of a representative for every slave that they had, but they also had to pay 3/5 of a tax on those slaves. So it was a compromise. It was a crass, cruel compromise. You can't make it anything other than that. And it was a compromise both over representation and taxation.
What tax did they pay before the income
It was a
tax?
head tax. It was a levied head tax per citizen that were levied on the states. States were given a tax every year. They were required to pay a tax bill to the United States that was equivalent to, let's say, $10 per citizen. Okay? So they had to pay on $10 on every white woman and child, and $6 on every African American man, woman, and child. And that, so it was a doubly crass decision. Yeah, the more you talk about this, the worse it gets, not the better it gets.
Well, it appears it was not about race.
Yeah.
We have time for two more questions.
The states were so critical at that particular time. We have a debate today about immigration. Immigration in early days was handled by the states, not the federal government.
Yeah, the 14th
The states
Amendment.
did it.
The 14th Amendment said, and that's the reason the 14th Amendment is so important, among the things. It's the protection of the laws, the due process of the law at the state level will lead to the incorporation of the Bill of Rights of the states, privileges and immunities of citizenship, but more important, the citizenship of people in the United States is determined not by the states but by the federal government. That's the 14th Amendment.
And
Yeah, I have a question. I have a real thing against the 17th Amendment. I mean, I think that was very much started our country as a Congress. That we don't even need a Senate because we made a director representative.
You would like to keep it in the old way?
Well, I just think the founders were a lot smarter than well, the progressives that put it in.
Well, the founders, as Alan said, the founders were not Democrats. The 17th Amendment was a democratic reform, obviously. One of the most obvious democratic reforms we've had. I think we have a problem in terms of, we need to get, as a society, we need to resolve some issues of representation. I think we've got major problems in terms of representation that the Constitution does not resolve. One of them is the incredible malapportionment because of the huge variations in populations of states. I tell people all the time, okay, California has two senators. Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma have 20 senators. Nearly all of them Republicans in 10 states that have 2/3 of the population of California. That is a malapportionment. And by the way, you could make the same argument in terms of the small states in the Northeast with Democrats, although the malapportionment there is quite a bit less. But that, I think, is a problem. It's a stumbling block that we've got to figure out a way to confront. And then both the gerrymandering and self-gerrymandering of the American people. Democrats moving into cities and legislatures figuring out how to redistrict for the advantage of political parties in different ways in different states. I think that's a massive problem we have in the United States. And this notion of winner take all, where we have one person, one seat, where you have single member districts, winner take all, has created a situation where, and this is a problem with about 40% of Americans, by the way, where if you're a Democrat and you live in my district, where Kay Granger is my representative and my two senators are John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, how well represented does a Democrat feel in those circumstances? The answer is not. And my Republican friend says, well, that's the way it should be because those damn Democrats, you know. And I say, okay, you move to San Francisco, so we have a situation where more than a third of Americans live in a nation where no one in representative office at the national level is of their political party. That's the reason congressional support is in the dumpster. It's below 20%, has been for 20 years consecutively, and often recently is below 10%. And I think the 17th Amendment is part of that, but I also think that the problem of reapportionment in the House is a problem.
But when the Democrats control Texas and the South, Republicans are in that position.
Yeah.
They can get anything. The only part of the Constitution that has anything to do with elections in the original Constitution is the House of Representatives. The only part. Everything else, they kept the public out in the parking lot. And things have changed. But by the way, I always have to try to remind my students, as conservative as they were, compared to what was going on in Europe, they were revolutionaries. Europe didn't understand what's going on. And that's why the Tocqueville comes over here and says, what is this America all about? And he writes about a lot of things that I'm always curious about, much more important than the Constitution, and I keep emphasizing the culture, our economic system, who we are as a people, common language, all those things add into it. I know those are very unpopular, and those issues were debated in them. You know, what language do we want to have? You know, and religion, everything else. All those were very important parts. Jefferson is my favorite individual. He cut up the Bible. You know that? Go look at the Smithsonian Institution. He cut up the Bible, tossed out the parts that he thought were ridiculous, and added his own. Isn't that fascinating? You know, he couldn't get elected to be mayor of Hearst. You know, he told me, thank you so much.
I promise there's one last question. Okay. I just want to say thank you very much to Jim and to Alan. I can't see doctors. I want to say a hearty thank you to you for spending your Sunday talking about the Constitution with us. And also, more importantly, for recognizing this 230th birthday of our Constitution. But more importantly, I just want to say this to all of you. As you leave here today, please don't forget to pick up your handy pocket Constitution. Never go anywhere without it. I don't. Please don't.
I have my Constitution app on my iPhone.
There you go.
Thank you for having this.
And I was going to say, I also want to say a brief thank you both to Jim and to Alan. And I just want to announce that. No? Actually, one better. These gentlemen are both very interested in rolling overseas and making a difference. So we are going to make, on behalf of you, donations to Mission Arlington, Mission Metroplex. Why? Because this is a Tarrant County conversation between a TCU professor and a UT Arlington professor. I want to thank all of you for coming, and please sign up. If you do have a chance to sign up, I will send out information on my next walk and talk town hall, where we get an opportunity to do exactly what this gentleman said, is share ideas, regardless of what we come to, but get a chance to have an open dialogue in the United States
By
of
the way,
America.
this is one elegant woman.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
All right, good to see you.